Welcome, everyone, to this episode of the Mortgages by Gretchen show, where I talk to real people in the field of real estate and business who are not only experts, but they're generous and willing to share their knowledge and their wisdom with us here today. The goal of the show is for you to gain some information and tips to help you reach your goals in business and owning real estate, and to take some of the guesswork out of what to do or who to call while you're in the process. And today, I'm very excited to have Julie Gill with me. Julie is a qualified mediator and the owner of Families First Mediation. And Julie has extensive experience in alternative dispute resolution, ADR, in a variety of areas. Julie is a trained arbitrator and mediation-arbitration. Am I saying that right? Qualified mediator?
A mediator arbitrator. Yeah, it's a mouthful.
Okay, cool. A certified divorce financial analyst, which is unique, and an advanced certified elder mediator, a certified specialist in both family mediation and family separation finances. And Julie is the current chair of Family Dispute Resolution Institute of Ontario, the FDRIO. Julie's collaborative style focuses on engagement and inclusion. She administers ADR processes by encouraging communication, identifying the context of the problem together with the needs and interests of the parties, and by helping it to generate potential solutions in a balanced manner. And I first met Julie through the Chamber of Commerce, I'm pretty sure, which might have been maybe 15 years ago, a long time
ago. A little while ago, yeah.
Yeah. Took an immediate liking to her and her personality, her attitude, and her really loving helping people, myself included. But everybody that she meets, she just wants to help people be happier. So that's awesome. Julie was later instrumental in helping me in her role as a mediator because I was separating from my now former husband, my former spouse, and she helped me through that process in so many ways that we'll touch on maybe a little bit during the interview. But I'm just a big supporter of people talking and working with Julie. Absolutely.
Thank you so much. I sound brilliant.
You are.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that so much.
So own your brilliance.
I will do that.
If you want to fill in anything more about your background or what you do, you can do that for us, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because I don't think many people come out of school and go, you know what I want to do? I want to be a mediator. I want to work with people in crisis, right? You kind of find your way into this, I find, right? So some people will find their way into any kind of ADR by being a lawyer or being a social worker, right? My background was I was an assistant vice president of Bank of Montreal. It wouldn't logically, on paper, this doesn't make any sense, right? Second career for me. I've been doing this since 2009. But I had a terrible divorce. Some of us have not so great divorces. And when I left BMO, it was kind of what am I going to do? And I did enough negotiation there that I really wanted to do it with families. And with my personal experience, I'm all right, that's it. So I went and got trained and started with separation divorce. And the weird thing about ADR is, you see my designations. It's one of those fields that you just keep learning. It's not like I do separation divorce and that's it, right? I find most people when I go to training, it's all people that have done something else. They do different versions, right? So I do community mediation, I do workplace restoration. There's all sorts of different areas, youth offender. There's also different things that that you do as a mediator, kind of make your life more interesting and well-rounded. And then you find your way into different designations and training. So it's just kind of a, personally and from an industry perspective, it's just something that kind of grows on itself. Right. You keep learning.
Totally makes sense because the skills that you would gain and have could be transferable to so many areas, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's the nice thing.
Yeah. And I think even just communication in general is such an area that anybody can benefit from. You're helping people communicate so.
Yeah, because we all have our styles. We have communication styles normally when we're just chatting, right? And then we have another style when, we're in fight or flight mode. And we have another when we're in crisis or when we're angry, and different emotions come in. We keep changing up our style, but it's important to know that we have one and kind of what the triggers are that cause us to respond or communicate in a different way and kind of being able to stop ourselves, right? It's one of those, knowing is half the battle, right? So sometimes somebody's sitting there going, that came across a little aggressive or is that how you meant that to come across? So when I'm working with people and doing communication coaching, that's kind of some of the things I'm looking for, right? It's here's how I heard this. Is that how you meant it? right, is just so powerful because, we read between the lines, we read tone into emails and texts and everything. And sometimes when we're ready in that heightened place, like somebody just has to say good morning to you and you haven't had a good day. And you're like, what do you mean by that? Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. 100%.
Yeah.
So, wow. So there's so much we could talk about. So I'll try to be a bit concise. You help a lot of families. And if we start maybe with your work as an elder mediator, in my business, that comes into play because people sometimes when they are older or not even that old, but once you hit 55 plus, there are programs such as reverse mortgages or there's equity mortgages. There's lots of different ways to help someone who maybe they're not earning the income that they used to, or maybe they are. So that comes into play in my business. But what I would say is anything related to finances, especially when someone is older, that of course affects their children and their grandchildren as well. How can you help with people in that type of a situation where somebody is making decisions about finances when they are older?
Yeah, so I mean, there's multiple ways that kind of comes into some of the work I do, and one of it is, I guess, one of the ways is older adults, older children coming back to live with parents after divorce, parents and children buying homes together. So they're both contributing money and trying to figure out how that works is one issue. Having children that you say, I've got this mortgage and we hope the older we get that we have more equity in our homes. So it's like, what do I do with it? It's easier, if you're lucky enough to buy a home at 20 or 30, probably don't have a ton of equity, right? But the more equity that we get from it, it's like, well, how are we going to preserve that equity? And what do we want to have happen? But sometimes you've lent money to one child and not the other, right? So you're looking at a different split. Sometimes it's the family cottage, that you want to stay in the cottage and you don't want it to be sold, right? Sometimes it's you have supported, you will know this, you've supported a child and you've co-signed for something which now limits your ability to purchase what you need, right? And then there's that kind of, there are a lot of siblings or a lot of children that kind of say, well, that's my inheritance, right? So they see the parents' home or the parents' cottage or the family cottage as their inheritance, not something that is going to fund potentially the care or the lifestyle of their parents, which is needed. So you see, like sometimes spending money before they have it, or there's any reason to have it, right? Or, if a parent is making that decision, or an older adult in your life, it's the feeling that, if it's 60 or 70 and they're making that decision, that if you're younger, you know better and you can help them, right? You don't want them to get another mortgage. You don't want them to do this for whatever reason. And usually it's really good intentions, right? But sometimes it's seen as interfering or, not in that person's best interest. So there's a ton of family conversations that sometimes people want to have and don't know how, or they just don't have them. And then people go off and make their own stories and try and fix problems that they perceive as problems. But, anybody 55, I'm 55 next year, anybody 55 and up, it's my decision what I choose to do with my money and my housing and my mortgages. It shouldn't really be a family discussion unless there's some capacity, there's some illness, there's something else going on in the background. It's kind of knowing when to back off and say, this is not my home, this is not my money, this is not my mortgage, and let your parents and your older adults do what they have been doing their whole life.
Okay, so that's a very I can appreciate. Yeah. And I guess so the point too would be if people are running into these scenarios from what other point they're coming at it, whether they're the child, the grandchild, the adult parent, if they're running into problems or difficulties navigating that, you could be helpful, I guess, then in that process.
Yes, absolutely. Sometimes family members will act better when there's somebody else in the room, right?
Yes. And that brings up a question for me is when would it be appropriate for them to talk to yourself as a mediator versus a lawyer? Or is there overlap, or what do you think about it?
I was thinking about it, I know some of the questions we're going to talk about. And one of the things I was going to leave people with is, a lawyer doesn't need to be your first call, right? So the cool thing about mediators and arbitrators and meet-arbs and coaches, we have a huge referral network, right? So sometimes talking to somebody that's not like, we need to take this to court, we need to do this. And even with that price point and just kind of going, what do I need to do? based on my situation, who are the right people to reach out to, right? Because getting the right lawyer is as important as just making, is more important than just making a phone call to a lawyer. So sometimes it's just getting information, right? So even if people don't choose to mediate or don't need me for that, I love calling the office and saying, here's the situation we have. I don't think we need to mediate, but based on this, who would you suggest we look at? Who should we call? Right? We've got the lawyers that don't want to litigate. We've got those relationships with the mortgage brokers, and it's worth calling a mediation organization, right?
Yeah.
Or a company or a mediation business like mine, because of that network alone, right? And just finding out is always, every decision you make, I think you need to make informed decisions, right? Not emotional ones, but informed decisions. And ADR is such a huge piece of having that autonomy in your decision making and not handing over to somebody else. Because I think there's a belief that if I have a lawyer, they're going to do everything for me. Like they're going to make my decisions, and they will, should you not. But do you really want to give that power away to somebody else, whether it's a lawyer or a judge or anybody, even a mortgage broker, your bank? You want to make sure you're in control of those decisions and that you're getting information and you're getting your voice heard. And that's where mediation kind of, I think has a step up over immediately calling a lawyer. So I think there's a lot of benefits.
Yeah. And speaking from my experience, prior to working with you, I think at that point I'd had 3 different lawyers. And I was finding all it was doing was costing me money. It wasn't moving anything forward. And so when I met with you, one of the biggest benefits that I just want to share with our audience was not only giving me an alternative way to handle what I needed to handle, but also gave me a feeling of empowerment that I was trying to move forward, not be as emotional, be more strategic, get my thoughts and my words into a format that could benefit the process, but it could even benefit me personally to see that I was getting some clarity. So there were so many unexpected benefits that I look back, and when you and I reconnected recently, and after not having talked in a little while, it all came back to me, and I'm so grateful for that. So I think people need to know, like, it's multiple layers of benefit to work with.
Thank you. And I'm so honored and grateful. Like I truly am, being able to have people trust me to work with me. Right. And sometimes it's not mediation and I can't get both parties or the whole family together, but I'll work with those who can. Right. So sometimes it's just coaching. Sometimes, like, I know what you need to do in this situation. Here's the steps, get a lawyer for this, do this, let me vet your emails. I think there's a different way that you can communicate that and still get what you need. So sometimes it's just coaching, but I think it can be valuable.
Yeah, it's huge. Okay, so what would be your top 1 or 2 tips to those handling decisions? We'll kind of, for a moment, go back to the parent situation where either they are the adult making the decisions or it's their parent. And I guess my question originally was how if they need more help and involvement or the kids, or maybe they don't want the help. So you kind of did touch on that. I mean, I guess your bottom line is it's the adult who owns the property's decision ultimately, unless there's impairment.
There's one critical thing, like, so if people are organized, and I think everybody should be organized, to have a will and their powers of attorney set up, lots of times the power of attorney, personal care is different, right? So there has to be no capacity in order for somebody else to make decisions for you. But more often than not, when you sign the POA for your finances and that, it's as soon as you sign it. So you could have lovely children that are totally supportive of you. You have full capacity, but your children are disagreeing with the decision you make, and you've given them the power to dispute you, right? Full capacity, you can make decisions, but they think they're helping. So there's a lot of conflict around parents and children when they've just given the power of attorney away before they should, or there's no criteria that says there needs to be incapacity for you to be able to help me with this stuff, right? So sometimes children will jump in before they're needed. So to that point, it's like, make sure they want the help, right? And there's sometimes where you will see that older adult in your life and you think there will be something there and you've got some concerns or you'd like to share your voice. It's doing that respectfully, right? So they hear you, like, Mom, Dad, I think I'm a little concerned about this, right? I'm here to help. Do you need any help? What would you like from me? Versus kind of walking in and taking over a process, right? And even when you talk about capacity, it's kind of, there's different levels of capacity. You can make certain decisions and need help with others. But I think it's being able to voice your concerns if you have them. But other than that, it's asking if they need help. and waiting till there's a request or that approval before kind of jumping in and helping. I will put in quotes, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's huge. So that's really good to know that. That's smart way to look at it. You need to really consider if you're giving power of attorney, how you want to set that, how and when you want that to be set up.
Yeah, and so many disputes around that, and estate stuff. So my elder mediation is kind of, I'm like one of a handful of people in Canada with my designation. And it's not turned into the families that really want to work together for the benefit of somebody or a caregiver or the older adult. It tends to be more estate POA disputes. It's the family doesn't agree on, even how to share the costs of if mom or dad has been moved into a care facility and now the children are handling what to do with the home, right? Which you would see all the time. What happens if it comes up for remortgage and they haven't decided if they're going to sell or it hasn't sold? Who's maintaining the cost of this home while the costs are now going to a care facility? Is there enough money? Do the parents have enough money to do that, or are the children now participating and putting their own funds in? And what does that look like, right? There's so many just logistical issues that honestly a lawyer can help from a legal perspective, but it's kind of the practical aspects that you're really better off with a coach or a mediator or somebody else working with your family to go, people, how do you feel about that? Like, cards on the table, confidential process. What are you worried about? Is there money? Can we make sure that money gets back to you? How do we make the family whole or the person whole that's doing more of the caregiving or putting in more of the additional cost to support mom or dad? They're great family conversations that can happen. And sometimes they're around family businesses, right? You've got the older adult saying, well, how do I do the succession planning? How do I hand off my baby? I still want to be involved in this. How do I bring my children in to support this more? And what does that look like with spouses of my children? Like, families are complicated.
Yeah. And that's bringing into my mind I do a lot with investors, and a lot of the investors are either also have a family business, or maybe the family business is the investments. They're
Yeah.
full-time real estate investors with a big portfolio. And I don't know that, well, I'd say, I'm sure there are some that aren't prepared for those things that happen. So I think even in that scenario, I think maybe it'd be good to chat with you to see maybe you can want to speak to the real estate investor network that I'm part of, because that's huge.
It is. It's interesting when you start to see where the coaching and the mediation can fit in with families, when most people think of family mediation, honestly, as it's separation, divorce, and it's so much more. So I love having this opportunity to talk about what more it can be.
Yeah, that's amazing. Good, good. Well, so my next question is specifically though back to mediation, couple is separating. So, as I mentioned before, I used your services and you really helped me to um, handle what was a scary and a sad, difficult time for me, and gave me a lot of encouragement and help and healing and strategy, action. It was amazing. So, what would you say, with that in mind? What would you say you feel is the biggest benefit of you helping people when they are specifically like separating and moving through that process?
I love that the power with the people. The power stays with the people, right? Like, they have their autonomy to make decisions that work for them. It was sometimes it gets taken out of your control, right? So my ex and his lawyer really wanted to go through the court process and really wanted a judge to make decisions. And our children were 3 and 5, and I couldn't figure out why this other person external does. Like, I knew we were fighting. This is before I did this for a living. I just knew there had to be a better way to do this. And as difficult it is to sit across the table sometimes and have this conversation about how to share Christmas with your children and your ex, it's better than going through the court process and having a judge tell you when you're going to see the children, right? Or divide up your property in a way that feels fair for you. Right? Like, the law is very specific on date of separation, date of marriage, right? Like, there are very specific rules, but they don't always align with the family. Remember, I've given you this, or you took this time off and we kind of had an agreement, right? That we were going to adjust for this. God forbid anything happened and we separated. And the families can have those conversations. We can think about how grandparents and their relationships with the kids and their time with the kids gets factored into it. We can move puzzle pieces around where you can, while you've got very strict obligations under child support, spousal support, property, equalization of the house, a little, there are rules, but you can move those pieces around so they fit for you. You don't have that luxury right? If you go to court and if you go through lawyers, there is a tendency for your lawyer to go, no, 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 no. You know, that's against my advice, because they're looking out for you as the client and your best interest, not the best interest of your family or your children, and certainly not your ex, right? There's just a lot more opportunity to be creative. And honestly, I think being empowered to make those decisions, they last longer, right? So somebody telling you have to do this, buying into, I have to do this, and I had a voice and I told you what my concerns were and I understand why we're going this way, more likely for it to continue.
That's a great point.
Right.
Yeah. If everybody's like, this is okay with me, they're not, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's going to be better. I
Yeah.
like that. Okay. So, you are a certified divorce financial analyst. So how does that benefit, and how is it different than if you didn't have that designation? Like, what you could offer more, obviously, by having that. Maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Being a CDFA is just as exciting as it sounds. If you like numbers, I love numbers. I'm a numbers geek. So what it does is this designation allows me to work with financials for people that are going through separation and divorce, right? So understanding enough about the laws with respect to financials, and I can advise where I can't on the mediation side. As CDFA, I can. It makes obviously my mediation stronger because I understand the financial impacts of divorce, and then actually that leads into wills and estate mediations as well. But it's being able to work with the clients to prepare their financial disclosure that has to be done, and understand why those pieces are going into that financial disclosure and what they mean, right? Because there's a fear often if it's been a while since your date of separation and you all of a sudden have to disclose your current assets. Well, why is that anybody else's business? What's going to be done with that information, right? There's a lot of fear around that. There's a lot of people that are self-reps and just don't know where to start, or their spouse handled all the financials and now they're left fighting for themselves, literally, and not understanding what their financial situation looks like, or be able to have those conversations informed with their lawyers, right, or in court. So most of the work I do on as a CDFA is with self-reps, right?
Sorry, what was it? So
It's with self-represented people, right? People that haven't chosen to go to lawyers and don't have that support, but still want to know what they're doing, right? Or create a proposal or review a settlement option. You say, what am I missing in this? So it's not legal advice, but it can be financial advice, but very, very specific to financial disclosure and what's happening around separation and divorce. Right. So without that, I felt like I was doing my clients a disservice having those financial conversations with them without the knowledge and being properly trained to do it. So I went and got that designation. It feeds off of each other, right?
yeah, I love it. That's good. Okay, so we do hear a lot about the effects of COVID on our mental health, and also the effects of the economy, higher prices, higher interest rates. People are financially stressed. I feel it. I feel it through my customers as well, who are having challenges. And I would say, so in your work, have you sort of adapted or noticed anything that was required of you because of these sorts of things happening to all of us in our culture and our world?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest impact to me personally in my business was I closed up my actual, brick and mortar office in October 21 because I hadn't seen a client in person since March 2020. And other than my elder mediation work, I tend not to get any requests to see people in person. It's all gone to Zoom, which, has some wonderful benefits, but you miss that kind of in person. Or there are times, sometimes that client just needs a hug, right? Or they, you need to read their body language or give them the ability to get up and walk around. You miss that. So that's changed how we all kind of work, right? But it's also been amazing from a cost perspective for clients, and they're being comfortable in their own home, in their comfy clothes with their, their mug, having that conversation is I think opened up for people, that it's making them feel comfortable. They don't have to be with the spouse or the brother or sister that they're not comfortable with. But it's made buyouts much harder, right? I mean, and the ability to qualify for a mortgage. So whether it's, on the elder side or the separation divorce side, that has kept people living together longer than they probably should, and increased, sadly, domestic family violence in the homes. Power imbalances have, really become more imbalanced. And we have tribunals and courts just backlogged. So where you would have an option if you didn't or couldn't afford a lawyer, and you didn't want to mediate, or you couldn't afford a mediator, you could get into court and have decisions made and got processes moved, and you can't. The tribunals are backlogged. If it's a landlord-tenant issue that you're facing, if you rent, right? We've talked about mortgages, but renting, you can't get in, right? The same thing in the courts. You can't get in. So now we've lost like kind of that access to justice where there was some options for people. Those options have been they're so limited now. Right.
Yeah.
So I think it's us having to do more and offer different rates and things like that, and do different pro bono work for the people that truly need to have a case or an issue resolved, right, and moved forward. So I think how that gets resolved is going to be interesting over the next couple of years, but it will make ADR, and it has made ADR much more important and a much bigger priority than it was 3 years ago.
Okay.
Right.
Sense. Thank goodness you're there offering these things. And
thank goodness. Had I known then what I know now,
Yeah. Okay, so are there any specific areas I haven't really touched on that you think might be important for people to know about specifically? Or
I think the prevention piece is important. So I've always tried to get people to have proactive conversations. So whether it was a separation divorce side, or people getting married, saying, have these conversations. Does someone want to stay home with the children? What does this look like? What are your career goals, right? Not just, we love each other, this is wonderful. I've been there, you've been there. Everybody, that's lovely. Sometimes you forget, the other part of your brain stops working and you go, it'll just be okay. But we know that doesn't happen sometimes, right? So it's being preventative and getting cohabitation agreements, right? And doing prenups, but not in the way that they used to be done. It wasn't the person that had the most assets was literally, the week before the wedding saying, here you go, my lawyer has drafted this. It's sitting down together and creating a prevention document. Like in mediation, I have the most fun conversations with people that are going to get married, right? But it's like, what do you want to do with this? Did you do your financial disclosure? Do you each know, like, are you getting married to somebody you didn't know they had $70,000 in debt? And that impacts the goals that you thought you both had, right? What do you want to do with your assets or liabilities or your car? How do you want to deal with things? Right? I think it's so important to do that work together and not that old school being handed a prenup. And the same on the elder side, when you're doing your wills and your power of attorney, I used to advocate, and it got me nowhere, for having those proactive conversations. Like, you're going to piss off one of your children when they read this, and they're going to start a fight, right? And I mean, I think I've even had this conversation with my dad on some other issue, and it was like, not my problem. I'll be dead. You guys could figure out what to do with the house or this. And I go, well, we want to do what you want us to do, but you need to tell us. So because those conversations are hard, we're now working with a lot of people saying, let's write down your intentions. What do you want to have happen? What are your expectations? Right? Why did you make that decision? So that your family doesn't fight about it. Why did you pick this person as power of attorney? And leave them instructions for what you want to be done, right? It's not them guessing or them making the decision that is good for them. They're supposed to make a decision that you would make in your place. So if you're not sharing that information, right, you're not having those conversations before you get married, if you're not doing the prevention stuff, you're setting yourself up for needing me afterwards when, can't close the barn door after the horses are out.
I think that's a great point and really shows your integrity and how you really do want to help people. So people definitely should be reaching out to you. And how do they find you to have that next conversation?
I'm on Facebook, my website, so familiesfirstmediation.com, on Twitter, ADR for all. So there's always a way to find me, or reach out to you and you will direct them.
And your email? What's your email?
Julie at familiesfirstmediation.com.
And your phone number?
905-427-0100.
Okay, awesome. So people will definitely find you. Well, thank you so much. You've got my wheels turning of all these different ways you can help me and people I know and my customers. So get ready to be really busy.
I will happily answer those phone calls and help in any way, shape, or form I can.
Well, thank you so much, Julie. This has been amazing.
Thank you for having me.
Take care.
Bye.